Okay, so the function is going to do what we looked at in the last video, and let's just check what someone types into the entry field. And if it's not what we want, we're just going to reject it. Okay, so the first thing to do is to define a list of what we deem to be acceptable numbers to be typed in the box. Otherwise, it rejects them. So if you've done anything in Python before, you'll know you define a list literally by just putting numbers in brackets or words, depending on what you want to put, in your list. So I'm just going to call mine ram underscore list. And then all I want people to be able to say is, I want one RAM module, or I might want two RAM modules, or I might want four RAM modules. Now, one and two is probably going to be enough here, but I'm just going to go for four in case, someone's wanting to order more. We could go extra and maybe do eight, but what we're basically asking people is if you want 256 gigabytes of RAM, for example, do you want two 128 sticks, or do you want four 64 gigabyte sticks? Or so we're just giving them the options to tell us how many modules they want, or they might just want one module, which is fine. So we've defined the RAM list, and we know that we're going to be accepting 1, 2, or 4 as valid entries. Okay, now we can define our validation. And I'm going to just call it valid, just because it kind of makes sense really to for me to just kind of remember what it is. All right, so we're going to use an if statement. And the basic logic, the structure behind this is if something is true, then do this. If that thing is not true, then do something else. And we're going to use if and else if, which basically means if this or if this, otherwise do that. So what we need to do, first of all, is we're going to use a function, a command rather, that Python understands called try. So what we're basically saying is try this, otherwise do that. So what we need to say is if, and I want to convert whatever the person types, whatever number the person types into the box into a whole number. So I want to put int in front of it. And our entry we called ent underscore ram, and we want to get that the same as we did before. What we're saying is if whatever someone types into the entry field, which we defined entry.ram, get that, make sure it's a whole number, and then check if it's in the RAM list, which was 1, 2, or 4 that we defined just a minute ago. Okay, if it is, then we want to update our LBL response label. So we config that, same as we did with our other labels before. And we want to change the text to whatever the person types in the list, because we know it's a valid number from our RAM list. All right, so the first part of this is saying try this. If the number typed into the entry field is in the RAM list, then update the response with that number. Okay, so that's the first part of it. It's pretty straightforward. Now we want to go back so that the next part of this is lined up, because remember before we said spaces are important in Python. So we want this if, that's complete now. What we want now is the next element of this, which is the else if. So it's another if. So it begins lined up with where our original if was. Okay, so it's the same sort of thing. So we're saying if this, else if this. So it's the same as before. So we want the number to be an integer, and we want it to get the contents of the entry box. This time we're going to say it's not in the list. Okay, not in RAM list. So what we're basically saying here is, if it's in the list, stick it on the label. If it's not in the list, then do this. And at this point, we want to be able to basically say, we want a message box. And TK has a built-in message box, and it's literally tk.messagebox.show info. And then we type in here 2 items of text. The first item is what appears at the top of the window, and the second item is what appears on the actual window itself. So it's just an info box, or it's a warning box, so I can just put info or warning or attention, something along those lines. And then the second element, which is also in quotes, is telling the person what's wrong with what they've written. So input is 1, 2, or 4 only. All right, something like that. So we're just kind of saying to them, this is what you've done wrong, and we are guiding them to then go and put that right. Okay. Right, and then the last thing we need to do is to tell it what to do if it tries that and it doesn't get that. So we need to come back so that we're now lined up with try. And this is called except. We're going to use something called value error, which Python understands. Okay, so if it's not in the list, it throws an error. If it is in the list, it doesn't throw an error. If it's something else entirely, like a letter rather than a whole number, then we want it to throw an error message. So we don't want people to be able to type in asterisks or and signs or any letters or different characters, because we want it to just reject those altogether. For this one, we use a different TK message box, same as we did before. So it's TK message box.show info. Okay, and it's exactly the same as we did the last one. So again, we can call it info or attention or something like that. And then it's a slightly different message here because we're not guiding them as to that it's 1, 2, or 4, because they've typed something in that isn't a number. So we want to, in this case, say input is number only, or only a number, or input must be a number, or only numbers accepted, something along those lines. So if we've done this accurately, what we've basically said is we've typed something in the RAM box, and if it's in the list, we can update the label. If it's not in the list, but it's a number, then we're telling them through a message box that something isn't right. And if it's something else that isn't a number at all, then we're throwing an error that says, hey, put a number in this box. Okay, so let's see if this works. Okay, it's giving me an invalid syntax just here, and that's probably because Python likes the correct number of spaces. So we want it just to come back so it lines up with LBL. Okay, so Python understands things in terms of the order and logic that it does things by how many spaces are on the line below. So we can see the whole thing for try and accept is all lined up 4 spaces from the side. Everything underneath try is lined up 4 spaces again, And then everything underneath the if is lined up 4 spaces under the elif is lined under 4 spaces under the except is. So spaces are important. Okay, it's given me an error message. It looks like I've missed out a bracket just there. Oh, and I've also missed off. Okay. Okay, so easy to make those mistakes. So just be careful, as we said before, that you've got all of your relevant things in the right place. So if this is working like it should, if we type 1, 2, or 4 in the box and press enter, it should update the label. So 1, 2, 4, they're all working fine. Any number that isn't 4, input should be 1, 2, or 4 only. Anything that isn't a number at all, input is number only. Okay, so that, if you're, especially if you're doing unit 14, is going to be useful for you because you're going to want to be able to demonstrate that you can validate some fields. And that does that for us nicely.